My name is Aaron. I'm 32. And if you had asked me a few years ago what kind of relationship I had with my family, I would have said complicated but manageable. We weren't the kind of family that hugged every day or said, "I love you," before hanging up the phone, but there was a routine sense of duty holding us together. I helped where I could. They leaned on me when things got rough, and for the most part, I thought that was enough. But looking back now, I see the cracks had been forming long before my brother ever shouted those words at me. It started in small ways, the kinds of things that you brush off at the moment because you don't want to seem overly sensitive. Like how my parents always introduced my younger brother, Ryan, as the one who's going places, while I was the one still figuring things out. Ryan was 3 years younger than me, and he had this natural charisma that seemed to shield him from consequences. Even when he made mistakes, everyone laughed them off as part of his charm. Meanwhile, my accomplishments, as modest as they were, passed without notice. I remember one Christmas when I told them I'd been promoted at work. Ryan had just bought a secondhand motorcycle, and that was all anyone talked about for the rest of the night. It stung, but I told myself that's just how families are sometimes. You take the teasing, you deal with the favoritism, and you move on. Except, it wasn't just teasing. Slowly, the weight of being the responsible one became a trap. I was the one who helped with rent when the bills piled up. I was the one who covered late car payments because my dad's hours had been cut and my mom's side business wasn't bringing in enough. I told myself I didn't mind because I was keeping the family afloat. I thought, foolishly, that maybe they appreciated it even if they didn't say it out loud. Ryan, on the other hand, never lifted a finger to help. He lived at home rent-free, spent his paychecks on flashy gadgets, nights out, and whatever hobby he had picked up that month. My parents excused it every time. "He's still young," my mom would say, though he was 28 by then. "He just needs time to get on his feet." I wanted to shout, "So when do I get to be the one who's still young? When do I get a pass?" But I swallowed the frustration because keeping peace was easier than starting a fight. The turning point came one night when I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through bills. My dad was in the living room, watching TV, while Ryan was pacing around talking loudly on his phone about some new investment opportunity. My mom came over and slid another envelope across the table, another overdue notice. "Aaron, can you take care of this?" she asked softly, like she was embarrassed to ask, but already knew I would say yes. I stared at the paper, then at her, and something in me cracked. "Do you guys even realize how much I've been covering for this family?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. The silence that followed was suffocating. My dad muted the TV. Ryan looked over with that smug half-smile he always wore, as if my anger was some kind of joke. "Oh, come on," he said. "You act like you're some kind of hero because you pay a few bills. You're just a parasite dragging us down, always whining about how hard you've got it." He slammed his phone on the counter for emphasis. "If you don't like it, then find somewhere else to suck off." The words hit me like a slap. Parasite. I'd spent years keeping them afloat, sacrificing my own life and opportunities, and that's what I was reduced to in his eyes. A parasite? I didn't yell back. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even cry in front of them. I just felt this cold clarity settle over me, like something I'd been blind to had finally come into focus. Without a word, I stood up, walked to my room, and began packing my things. My mom tried to stop me, her voice frantic. "Aaron, don't take him seriously. You know how he gets." But I couldn't even look at her. My dad muttered something under his breath, maybe an attempt at calming the situation, but I didn't care. Ryan smirked as I dragged my suitcase through the hall, and I swear I'll never forget that look. He thought he'd won. That night, I left and didn't look back. No long explanations, no drawn-out goodbye. Just silence. And for the first time in years, I felt strangely free. But 3 weeks later, that freedom was interrupted by a phone call I wasn't expecting. It was my mom, her voice breaking, tears choking every word. "Aaron, why did the creditors take the car? We don't understand. What happened?" My chest tightened, not with guilt, but with a grim sense of justice. I typed my reply slowly, each word deliberate. "Ask the parasite." I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. That single message was the first domino. Everything began to unravel faster than I ever could have imagined. The fallout started small, but it grew quickly, like cracks spreading across glass. After that first call from my mom, the texts began flooding in. At first, they were desperate. Pleas for me to come back, to explain what I'd done. But beneath the panic, the same old entitlement bubbled through. "You know this family can't function without you," my dad wrote once, as if I were some kind of appliance they'd misplaced rather than a son who'd been insulted out of his own home. Ryan didn't bother with pretense. His first message to me was a single line: "Real classy move. Walking out and leaving us to clean up your mess." My mess. That was the word he chose. Not the mortgage payments I'd covered, not the overdue bills I'd shouldered, not the endless excuses I'd swallowed for years. No, suddenly, I was the one who had left a mess behind. I didn't respond. I thought silence would make it clear that I was done playing their game. But instead, it only fueled their anger. Calls came at all hours of the night. My phone buzzed so much it felt like it was vibrating straight into my bones. I started turning it off just to get some peace, but every time I turned it back on, there were more missed calls, more messages. And then the guilt tripping began. My mom left long voicemails, her voice thin and ragged. "Aaron, your brother is under so much stress now. He's trying his best, but without your help, we're drowning. Please don't punish the whole family because of one fight." She always framed it like that, one fight. As if Ryan screaming Parasite in my face and shoving me out the door was some minor sibling spat, easily forgotten if only I were mature enough to move on. My dad took a different tack. "Families stick together," he said in a message. "That's what makes us strong. Don't be selfish." Selfish. The word stung, though I knew it shouldn't. After all those years of giving, covering, and carrying, I was now selfish for finally putting myself first. Ryan, of course, leaned fully into his role as the golden child. From what I gathered through their posts online, he had taken over as the man of the house. He bragged on social media about stepping up for the family, though anyone who knew him could tell he was all talk. One photo he posted stuck with me, a selfie of him standing in front of the house with his arm around my mom, captioned, "Family first, always." The comments were full of people praising him for being a good son. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I was the one who'd kept them afloat all those years, but the moment I left, he became the hero by default. Meanwhile, I began piecing together just how deeply they'd relied on me. The car wasn't the only thing creditors had taken. The utilities were being shut off one by one. My mom hinted at it when she called again, her voice low and ashamed. "They said if we don't pay soon, they'll cut the power." It wasn't a request, not outright, but I could hear the expectation in her tone. She wanted me to swoop in again, to be the safety net I'd always been. But I stayed quiet. Every word I might have said felt like it would only pull me back into their grasp. The more they unraveled, the more hostile Ryan became. One night, around midnight, I got a string of texts so furious I could practically feel his rage bleeding through the screen. "You think you're better than us? You think walking out makes you some kind of saint? You're a coward. Always have been. When this family falls apart, it'll be on your head." A second later, another text. "Don't come crawling back when you realize no one else wants you." I stared at the messages for a long time, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with the mixture of anger and sorrow that comes when someone you love twists the knife deeper. But what haunted me most wasn't Ryan's fury or my parents' guilt trips. It was the realization that none of them saw me as a person. I was a resource, a wallet, a scapegoat. My mom only called when she needed money. My dad only lectured me about duty. And Ryan only ever noticed me when he wanted someone to blame. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this dynamic hadn't started the night Ryan called me a parasite. It had always been this way. That was just the first time I refused to ignore it. And still, even as I tried to move forward with my own life, they wouldn't let me go. My aunt, who had always been close with my mom, started messaging me too. "You're tearing your family apart," she scolded. "Ryan told me everything. He said you ran off because you didn't want to contribute anymore. Is that true?" The lies Ryan fed them spread quickly, painting me as the deserter while he played the martyr. I could feel the walls closing in, not because I believed their version of events, but because the isolation was suffocating. My whole family had chosen his narrative over mine, and I was left shouting into the void, unheard and unseen. What they didn't know was that I had kept meticulous records. Years of bank statements, text receipts, and transfer slips. Every cent I had paid to keep that household from sinking. I never thought I'd need them, but something told me not to throw them away. And now, as the accusations mounted and the manipulation deepened, Those records burned like a hidden weapon in the back of my mind. I didn't want revenge, at least not yet. But I wanted the truth. I wanted them to see, once and for all, who had really been the parasite. And then, one night, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It wasn't my mom or dad this time. It was Ryan. His voice was sharp, cold, and dripping with venom. You think you're smart, don't you? Sitting out there, letting us burn. But guess what? You can't hide forever. You're still family. And you're going to pay, one way or another. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. And Ryan was determined to drag me back into the fire, no matter what it took. The call from Ryan stuck in my head for days, echoing like a warning bell I couldn't shut off. I tried to push it aside, to focus on my new routine. I had found a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with creaky floors and a view of the alley. But it was mine. For the first time in years, my paycheck wasn't evaporating into overdue bills that weren't mine. I stocked my own fridge. I paid my own utilities. I even bought a second-hand couch, something that felt like a luxury after living on hand-me-downs all my life. For a brief moment, I let myself feel proud. But peace never lasts long when someone is determined to destroy it. One Friday evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find a thick envelope wedged into the crack of my door. At first, I thought it was junk mail, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. Inside were collection notices, not mine, but in my name. Loans I had never taken. Accounts I had never opened. I flipped through them, each page heavier than the last, until I found the signature at the bottom of one of the agreements. My brother's. Sloppy, rushed, but unmistakable. My hands shook as I sank onto the couch, the papers scattered around me. I had always feared Ryan might drag me into his messes, but I never thought he'd cross this line. He hadn't just insulted me. He hadn't just leaned on me. He had stolen my identity, used my name, and tied me to debts I never asked for. Suddenly, his midnight call made sense. This wasn't about me abandoning the family. This was about him covering his tracks. He knew the creditors were circling, and he had decided to throw me to the wolves to save himself. I wanted to storm back to the house, to throw the papers in his face, but I knew better. Confronting him in person would only end with him twisting the story, turning my anger into proof that I was the unstable one. That's how it always went. He lied, I defended myself, and somehow I ended up looking like the villain. No, this time I needed to be smarter. I gathered the papers back into the envelope, tucked them into a drawer, and sat in silence until the early hours of the morning. My thoughts were loud enough to drown out the world. Over the next week, more letters arrived. Some from banks, some from collection agencies. All of them addressed to me. The weight on my shoulders grew heavier with each envelope. I tried to explain to myself that this was just paper, that it could be sorted out, but the betrayal burned deeper than the financial damage. It was the confirmation of everything I had feared. Ryan didn't just see me as expendable, he saw me as a shield. I wasn't his brother. I was his cover story. My mom called again around this time, her voice strangely upbeat, like she was trying too hard. Ryan's been under a lot of pressure, she said. But he's really stepped up. You should be proud of him. I almost laughed. Proud. I wanted to ask if she had any idea what he'd done in my name, but I held back. Something in her tone told me she knew more than she was letting on. That realization cut deeper than anything Ryan had said or done. My own mother, who had begged me to help them for years, had turned a blind eye when Ryan decided to throw me under the bus. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I went to my mailbox one morning and found a letter from my bank. I assumed it was another statement, but when I opened it, I froze. My savings account, what little I had managed to scrape together since moving out, was nearly drained. Only $112 remained. My heart pounded as I scanned the withdrawal slips attached to the notice. There were 3 large transactions, all made in person at a branch near my parents' house. The signatures weren't even close to mine, but the teller had accepted them. I felt sick. This wasn't just identity theft. This was theft from my future, my one fragile attempt to build something for myself. Ryan hadn't just sabotaged me. He had stripped me of the little security I had managed to hold on to. And my parents? They had to know. No one else had access to the documents he needed to pull this off. The betrayal wasn't just Ryan's anymore. It was the whole family's silence that roared in my ears. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by papers, collection notices, bank statements, forged signatures, and I realized the truth. The family I had sacrificed for, the people I had protected at my own expense, had decided I was expendable the moment I stopped playing their game. I wasn't their son. I wasn't their brother. I was a tool, and when I stopped being useful, I became the enemy. I stared at the empty balance on my statement, the red numbers on the collection letters, and something inside me hardened. For the first time, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt dangerous. And that was the night I started planning. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest I've ever known. It felt like the walls of my new life, thin and shaky as they were, had already collapsed before I'd even had the chance to settle in. Every day seemed to bring a new reminder of how thoroughly Ryan had sabotaged me. Phone calls from collection agencies became a grim routine. They'd call at work, in the middle of the night, even during the rare moments I tried to relax. I learned to recognize the pauses before the automated voices began, learned the hard edge and the tone of real people on the other end, demanding repayment for debts I'd never chosen. I tried to explain at first. That's not me. My brother forged the documents. But they didn't care. To them, a name was a name, a signature was a signature, and I was the name on the page. The weight of it was suffocating. I started waking up with a knot in my stomach, my chest tight, as if I'd run miles in my sleep. Even food lost its taste. I'd come home from work, sit on the edge of the bed, and stare at the floor until hours passed. The betrayal gnawed at me, but so did the silence from my parents. I expected some denial at first, maybe even anger at Ryan if I pushed hard enough. But instead, what I got was absence. No one called to check on me. No one asked how I was surviving with my accounts drained. They didn't even bother to defend Ryan anymore. It was as if, by leaving, I had forfeited my place in the family entirely. I was a ghost, erased, while Ryan lived comfortably in the house I had kept afloat for years. And yet, despite the pain, a strange clarity began to creep in. I realized how much of myself I had tied to their approval. For years, I thought if I just helped enough, gave enough, carried enough, they would see my worth. But now that the curtain had been ripped away, I understood. Nothing I did would have ever been enough. I wasn't their equal. I wasn't their son in the way Ryan was. I was the utility, quiet, dependable, replaceable when the lights finally flickered out. Still, the losses piled up. The landlord of my apartment called me in one afternoon, his expression tight. "Aaron, I like you. You pay on time. But these calls we're getting from collectors, it makes people nervous. We can't afford problems here." I nodded, swallowing the sting. Even here, in the one place I thought I had carved out for myself, Ryan's shadow loomed. I promised the landlord it was under control, though I could see in his eyes he didn't believe me. The hardest moment, though, came when I sat down and actually totaled up everything Ryan had taken. Between the forged loans, the drained account, and the unpaid bills still trailing after my name, I was tens of thousands in the red. Not life-ruining, maybe, if handled correctly, but for someone who had just started to rebuild from nothing, it felt like a mountain crushing my chest. I remember gripping the calculator so hard my knuckles went white, staring at the red digits, and whispering to myself, they left me with nothing. But that wasn't entirely true. They hadn't taken my ability to think. They hadn't taken my memory, my records, or the truth of what had happened. And little by little, that realization started to shift something inside me. I couldn't fight them openly, not yet. If I stormed into the house demanding answers, they would close ranks and turn it into another story of me overreacting. If I tried to call them out online, they'd paint me as bitter and unstable. No, if I wanted any kind of justice, it had to be careful, quiet, deliberate. So I started documenting everything. I built folders on my laptop, scanned every forged document, highlighted the mismatched signatures, noted every date and transaction. I kept a journal too, writing down every phone call, every debt notice, every memory of when I had paid for them in the past. It wasn't much, but it was something solid, something real in a world where my family had twisted the truth against me. Late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, I would scroll through those files and remind myself, you're not crazy. You're not imagining this. They did this to you. In the meantime, I cut back my own life to bare bones. Instant noodles and canned soup filled my cupboards. I stopped going out with coworkers after shifts. I turned down small luxuries, new clothes, a night at the movies, even replacing the shoes that had worn thin at the soles. It wasn't pride anymore. It was survival. If I could just hold on long enough, if I could just outlast the storm, maybe there would be a way forward. But Ryan wasn't finished. His voice kept echoing in my head from that midnight call. You're still family, and you're going to pay, one way or another. I didn't know what he meant then. But as the pressure mounted, as my life shrank into survival and planning, I began to fear what his one way or another might look like. And then, just as I thought things couldn't sink any lower, I received a letter that made my blood run cold. This one wasn't from a creditor. It was from a lawyer. The letter from the lawyer sat unopened on my table for a full day before I could bring myself to look at it. I was terrified of what it might say. Another notice, another debt, another weight pressing down. When I finally slid it open with shaking hands, I discovered it wasn't what I expected at all. It wasn't a demand, but a notification. I had been named in connection with one of the forged loans. The bank was investigating irregularities. For the first time in months, I felt something other than dread. Hope flickered. If the bank had noticed, maybe the cracks in Ryan's scheme were beginning to show. Maybe I wasn't as powerless as I thought. That night, I stayed up late, sorting through every piece of evidence I had collected, the signatures, the withdrawal slips, the records of my own payments through the years. I organized them into binders, labeled each section, even printed out timelines. For so long I had been drowning in their chaos, but now I was shaping it into something that could fight back. It was still just paper and ink, but for the first time it felt like armor. At the same time, I started to rebuild outside of the mess. Work, which had once been just a paycheck, became my anchor. I volunteered for extra shifts, stayed late when others wanted to go home. My boss noticed. "You've got grit, Aaron," he told me one evening. "Not many people would push through what you're dealing with." A month later, he offered me a promotion, shift supervisor. It wasn't glamorous, but it came with a raise, and more importantly, it was proof that I wasn't defined by my family's poison. With that extra money, I began to claw my way back. I opened a new account at a different bank, under tighter protections, and started saving again, slowly, cautiously. Every deposit, even the small ones, felt like a victory. I sold some old things online, picked up freelance work on weekends, and watched as the balance grew little by little. It wasn't much, but it was mine, untouchable by Ryan's hands. I also began investing in myself, in ways I never had before. I took a night course in financial literacy, determined to understand every loophole and safeguard that could protect me from further damage. I read about credit disputes, about how to build a case against fraud. The knowledge steadied me. For years I had been the one blindly handing over money, never questioning, never standing up. Now I was learning how the system worked, and how I could use it for my own defense. And slowly, people outside my family started to notice the change. A coworker named James, someone I'd only ever chatted with in passing, invited me out for coffee after hearing about my promotion. We talked for hours, not about debts or betrayal, but about books, music, even silly things like favorite movies. It felt strange to laugh again, to talk without the constant undertone of manipulation. It reminded me that life existed beyond the orbit of Ryan and my parents. Even my landlord, who had once eyed me with suspicion, softened when he saw the effort I was putting in. "I was worried about you, Aaron," he admitted one afternoon. "But you've been solid. Keep this up and you'll be just fine." Those words, simple as they were, meant more than I can describe. They were validation, the kind I had chased for years in my family, but never received. Yet, even as I built this fragile foundation, the storm at home didn't quiet. My mom left a voicemail one night, her voice heavy. "Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. He's stressed beyond measure. Ryan is doing everything he can, but he can't hold this family together alone. Don't you think it's time you stepped up again?" I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood. Stepping up for them meant stepping down for myself. But Ryan wasn't content to let me move on. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that he had been spinning new stories about me, telling relatives I had stolen from him, that I had abandoned the family in their darkest hour. The lies spread like wildfire, and I could feel the disapproval of extended family members in their silence online. Aunts who once liked every photo now ignored me. Cousins who used to invite me to gatherings left me out. Ryan was building his narrative carefully, painting himself as the victim. What he didn't realize, though, was that I was no longer the same person he had bullied out of the house months ago. I wasn't beaten down, desperate, and scrambling to keep afloat. I was working, saving, learning, and slowly gaining the tools I needed. Every lie he told, every debt he forged, every whisper he spread, it was all being recorded, documented, and stored. And then, one afternoon, I received an email that changed everything. The bank's fraud investigation team wanted to meet with me in person. They had questions about the loans in my name. It was the opportunity one had been waiting for, the chance to finally lay the truth bare, to show the world what Ryan had done. I sat back in my chair, staring at the message, my heart pounding not with fear this time, but with anticipation. The pieces were aligning. The rise wasn't complete, but for the first time, I could see the path stretching out ahead of me. And I knew, deep down, that the day would come when Ryan would no longer be able to hide behind his lies. The meeting with the bank was the moment everything began to tilt in my favor. I walked into their downtown office with my binder tucked under my arm, my stomach tight, but my mind razor sharp. Two representatives sat across from me, their expressions professional but curious. They asked simple questions at first, when I had applied for the loans, what I knew about the accounts in my name, whether I recognized the signatures. That was when I opened the binder. Page by page, I laid out the evidence I had been quietly collecting for months. The mismatched signatures, the timeline of withdrawals that didn't line up with my location, the transfer slips that led back to the branch near my parents' home. I showed them my work pay stubs from the days of the supposed transactions, proving I was across town at the time. I even had copies of old texts from Ryan, where he had boasted about handling things for the family while I was too busy working. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I saw disbelief flicker, not at me, but at Ryan. One of the investigators leaned back in her chair, her lips pursed. "This is substantial," she said, flipping through the pages. "We'll need to verify everything, but I'll be honest, this doesn't look like you're doing." The relief that flooded me was so sharp it nearly knocked the wind out of me. For months, I had been the accused, the scapegoat, the parasite. Now, finally, someone believed me. After the meeting, they asked me to keep quiet while the investigation continued. "If you confront your family now," one of them warned, "it could compromise our ability to hold the responsible party accountable." I nodded. It wasn't easy, but I understood. This wasn't about a shouting match in the living room anymore. This was about evidence, process, and strategy. In the weeks that followed, I noticed small shifts. Collection calls began to slow down. One agency even sent a letter confirming they had paused action pending investigation. My credit report, which had been strangled by Ryan's forgeries, started showing disputed accounts. It wasn't victory yet, but it was progress. And progress gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. At work, the promotion began to pay off in more ways than money. I had authority now, responsibility that extended beyond just myself. People came to me for answers, for decisions. For years, I had been the invisible one at home, the one who covered the bills but never got the recognition. Now, I was the one steering the ship. It gave me confidence I didn't know I had. But the real turning point came through an unexpected source. One night, I ran into an old neighbor, Mrs. Clark, who had lived down the street from my parents for decades. She was a sharp-eyed woman, the kind who noticed everything. We got to talking, and without prompting, she said, "I don't know how you put up with that brother of yours for so long. Always swaggering around, bragging about money he didn't have." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" She glanced around, as if checking who might overhear, then lowered her voice. "I've seen him more than once, walking into that branch near your parents' house. Always on days when your folks were panicking about bills. He'd wave receipts around like trophies. Said you were the one paying, but I knew better. The boy doesn't have the brains for it. If you ask me, he's been playing everyone." I thanked her, my mind racing. What she didn't realize was that she had just handed me something priceless: a witness. Someone outside the family who had seen Ryan in action, who could corroborate what I already knew. It wasn't just my word against his anymore. There was someone else who had noticed the pattern, someone credible. I added her statement to my growing collection of evidence, and with each new piece, the picture became clearer. Ryan wasn't just sloppy, he was reckless. And his recklessness was leaving a trail I could follow. Meanwhile, my parents' attempts to guilt-trip me grew more frantic. My mom left another message, her tone dripping with exasperation. You've made your point, Aaron. Enough is enough. Ryan is doing everything he can, and you're just sitting back letting your family fall apart. Don't you care about us? I saved the voicemail. Every word was another brick in the wall I was building, proof of how they had twisted the story. For the first time, I began to think not just about defending myself, but about striking back. What if I took everything I had, every receipt, every voicemail, every witness statement, and used it not just to clear my name, but to expose Ryan for who he truly was? The thought simmered quietly at first, but the more I considered it, the stronger it grew. By the time the bank's fraud team called me back for a follow-up, I had a new clarity. They confirmed they were pursuing legal action against the person responsible. They didn't say Ryan's name, but I didn't need them to. I already knew. And as I walked out of that office, binders still heavy under my arm, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The stage wasn't just being set for my defense anymore. It was being set for something far bigger. Because if Ryan wanted to call me a parasite, then I would show him exactly what happens when the so-called parasite stops feeding the host and starts fighting back. The revenge didn't happen in one fiery moment. It wasn't a slammed door, a screaming match, or some dramatic confrontation that left everyone in shock. No, what I learned, through the long nights of documenting and planning, was that the most devastating revenge is quiet, precise, and undeniable. The first move wasn't even mine. It was the bank's. A formal letter was sent to my parents' address, demanding repayment and announcing that the accounts linked to Ryan were under investigation for fraud. My mom must have been the one to open it, because she called me the next day, her voice trembling. Aaron, there's been a mistake. They're saying Ryan did something. But you know that can't be true, right? He wouldn't do that to you. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply said, I've already given them everything they need. They'll figure out the truth. Then I hung up. For once, I didn't chase after her approval or try to explain myself into being believed. I let the weight of silence do the talking. A week later, I was asked to give an official statement. I walked into that sterile office with my binder, my journal, and the voicemail recordings neatly organized. Every document had tabs. Every page was highlighted. The investigator raised her eyebrows when she saw the sheer volume of what I had brought. "You've done half our job for us," she remarked. I just nodded. I had been preparing for this for months. The real satisfaction came when they asked if I knew of anyone outside the family who might have witnessed Ryan's behavior. That's when I gave them Mrs. Clark's name, along with her contact information. She was eager to help, having always disliked Ryan's arrogance. Her statement, combined with my evidence, painted a damning picture. Meanwhile, Ryan had no idea how much of the ground beneath him was about to give way. He still posted online about being the rock of the family, the one sacrificing everything to keep them together. His captions grew more defensive, though. "Some people don't know loyalty," he wrote in one post, a not-so-subtle jab at me. But I didn't take the bait. I stayed silent, watching the net close in. The turning point came when I received a copy of the bank's decision in the mail. They had found sufficient evidence of fraud and were pursuing legal action against Ryan. The debts tied to my name were being cleared, my accounts freed from his shadow. It was everything I had been working toward. But I didn't just stop there. I knew my extended family still believed Ryan's version of events, that I had abandoned everyone, that I was selfish and bitter. So I made a decision. I didn't confront them directly. Instead, I gathered everything into a single file: the forged documents, the investigation results, the transcripts of my mother's guilt-ridden voicemails, even screenshots of Ryan's posts bragging about handling the money. Then, one evening, I sent it all in a single email to every relative in our family group. No commentary, no angry rant, just the evidence. The silence that followed was delicious. Hours ticked by, then a day, then two. Finally, a message popped up from one of my uncles, the kind who had always been closest to Ryan. I had no idea. "I'm sorry, Aaron." One by one, others followed. A cousin who hadn't spoken to me in months reached out privately, apologizing for believing the lies. My aunt, the one who had scolded me for tearing the family apart, sent a single line: "I owe you an apology." I didn't respond to most of them. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken louder than anything I could say. Ryan's carefully crafted facade had crumbled, and the people he thought he had wrapped around his finger were now staring at the ugly reality. But the sweetest moment came later, when my mom called again. This time, her voice wasn't guilt-tripping or angry. It was hollow. "Aaron," she whispered, "they've taken Ryan in for questioning. The police, they came to the house." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. I didn't gloat. I didn't laugh. I simply said, "That's what happens when you protect the real parasite." Then I hung up. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because everything was fixed, not because the scars had disappeared, but because the balance had shifted. The years of being overlooked, dismissed, and drained had finally turned into something undeniable. I wasn't the parasite. I had never been. And now, the world knew it too. But as much as the revenge felt complete, the fallout was only beginning. And I had no idea just how far the collapse of their carefully guarded house of cards was about to go. The fallout hit them faster than even I expected. Once the bank filed charges, everything Ryan had tried to hold together began unraveling. Word spread quickly, first among the extended family, then through the neighborhood. Neighbors who once waved at my parents now crossed the street to avoid them. My mom, who had always loved to host backyard gatherings, stopped posting photos altogether. My dad withdrew into silence, too proud to admit that the son he had called the real winner had been nothing more than a fraud. Ryan, of course, tried to fight it. He posted long rants online about being framed, insisting that I had set him up, but the evidence was overwhelming. The forged documents, the withdrawal slips, the witness statements. There was no room left for lies. His trial was brief. He was sentenced for fraud, ordered to repay what he had stolen, and left with a record that would shadow him for years. The swagger he once carried, that untouchable arrogance, was gone. When I saw him in court, sitting there in his wrinkled suit, I barely recognized him. He wasn't the golden child anymore. He was just another man caught in the consequences of his own choices. My parents weren't spared either. While they weren't charged, the financial fallout crushed them. The car was gone. The house, once held together by my silent contributions, slipped into foreclosure. They tried to reach out to me again, their voices softer now, humbled by loss. My mom's final voicemail was short, just 4 words: "We should have believed you." But I didn't call back. Some bridges, once burned, are better left as ashes. As for me, the storm cleared piece by piece. The fraudulent debts were wiped from my record. My savings, though scarred, began to grow again. At work, I continued to rise, no longer dragging the invisible chains of a family that had drained me for years. I moved into a better apartment, one with sunlight that poured through the windows in the morning. For the first time, I woke up without dread gnawing at my chest. The final act of closure came one quiet afternoon when I walked past my parents' old house. The yard was overgrown, the windows dark, a for sale sign staked into the front lawn. I stood there for a moment, staring at the place where I had spent years sacrificing myself, the place where Ryan had once called me a parasite. And then, with a calm I hadn't known before, I pulled out my phone, took a photo, and whispered to myself, "Ask the parasite." Then I turned and walked away, leaving the ruins of their lies behind me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying their weight. I was free.